You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and very useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And as I do every single week, I thank all of you, and I'm thanking all of you because our listeners keep growing each and every day, and it's because of you. We don't do any advertising whatsoever. It's all been done. Our listeners are growing organically, and it's because you're sharing individual podcasts or the entire show with families, with your family and friends to listen to. And I can't thank you enough. So many of you listen to it on, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. We're on all the various podcast stations. So thank you for that. And as I do know, our listeners are growing, and we're getting a lot of great comments because we have wonderful guests. And not going to disappoint you today. We have with us Mark and Mary Kay Liston. Mark and Mary Kay went to the ER to treat Mark's nasty cough some years back. Several hours later, the ER doctor told him that Mark had lung cancer with a ping-pong sized mass in his lung, and he needed to get to an oncologist immediately, only to learn 40 days later that he did not have cancer. Mark and Mary Kay Liston are co-authors of the book Diagnosed: Inspirational Stories After an Alarming Diagnosis. Their goal was to write a book for others who received a similar diagnosis and describe the thoughts, doctor appointments, hospital visits, and emotions one will be going through. So Mark and Mary Kay, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today.
Thank you, Frank. We're so happy to be here.
Yeah, so, I just kind of just touched the surface in the introduction. So maybe Mary Kay, why don't you give us some more detail on this really horrible experience, but maybe it was certainly you've helped to educate others that may have gone through something similar, but give us some more details on what happened with you and Mark.
It was actually coincidentally 18 months ago to the day that Mark had this bad cough, and some of you know that it's difficult to get one to go to the doctor sometimes, but I finally got Mark convinced to go to urgent care. We were there a few hours. The doctor proclaimed, "You've got to get to the ER right now." And by right now, he meant he called an ambulance to take Mark across the parking lot to the hospital. We sat in an emergency room, and they ran all sorts of tests for Mark. We were there 5 hours. Then the doctor came out, made his pronouncement: "You have lung cancer. You've got to find an oncologist." And we were flabbergasted.
When we got home, the toughest thing was telling the kids. We have 3 kids that are upper 40s, and calling them and saying, "Hey, Dad's got lung cancer." I didn't smoke. I was never around secondhand smoke. I was not working in an environment where there were carcinogens at all. But now I had lung cancer. After a few tears, we went home, and the very next morning, my daughter called from Florida. We're snowbirds, and at that point, we were in Ohio. And she says, "Hey, Dad, I have a 9 o'clock pulmonologist appointment for you on Tuesday." "Okay, sweetheart, we will be there." At that point, MK has got to figure out how we're going to get to Florida in a couple of days. I also that morning started journaling. I like to write. I've always liked to write, and Mary Kay likes to edit my writing, which is really helpful because all my writing looks smart now after she edits it. The other thing that I did is I put together a prayer warrior team. I never knew what a prayer warrior was until I had to put a team together. And we just had a couple of rules. You cannot put this on Facebook. You can't put it on any social media whatsoever. And we just asked to pray with us. And that was it. Not many not many prayer warriors can stay away from Facebook, but that's what happened.
Well, the visits to a series of doctors began then. And as you mentioned, Frank, it was 40 days. How biblical is that? 40 days after his diagnosis that the biopsy came back with no cancer. It made for a great Christmas, I got to tell you.
Well, I kept writing.
Right. So that's amazing to me that, you get that diagnosis, and I'm sure a lot of people would be going into a state of depression and, just again, feeling sorry for themselves and all that. But you started writing. Is that right? I mean, before you even knew that this really wasn't, the diagnosis wasn't correct. I mean, you started writing during that period that you thought you had this life-altering diagnosis.
I wasn't scared.
Right.
I knew if anything should happen, where I was going. I knew I had this great life. I was almost 70 years old. I was very, very blessed, and I wasn't scared at all. In fact, in our morning devotions, I wouldn't pray for myself. Mary Kay would. She'd say, okay, God, you can heal him too.
Right.
So we decided maybe this could be a book about helping other people understand what you're going to go through when you get the big C, or if you're going through an alarming medical diagnosis. On day 70, Frank, day 70 after the diagnosis, I got a message in the middle of the night. And I've never got a message before, anytime. And it said, Mark, this book cannot be just about you. Well, I had no idea who else I could write about. I didn't know anybody else at that time that was going through the big C. I didn't know anybody else that was going through an alarming medical diagnosis. So I decided to do something brilliant. And I don't do a lot of brilliant things in my life. I said, I'm 70 years old. All right, I'm going to put this on Facebook. Maybe that would help. So I wrote this note on Facebook, and I said, Mary Kay and I are going to write a book about cancer or other severe diagnoses. If you are a survivor, if you are a caregiver, if you are going through it right now, if you know somebody, just let me know. Send me a message. And I looked at Mary Kay and I said, I bet we get 2 or 3.
Well, Frank, within 12 hours, we had over 20 people saying, please tell my story. And that's really where it began.
Right. Wow. So your book encompasses not only your story, but other people's stories as well?
Yes. Half of the book is Mark's story, but the first half of the book is 26 different cases of people's stories told in their voice about what they went through, from diagnosis of something really scary all the way through to treatment. And in fact, of the 26, 24 are still thriving today.
Wow.
There's 15 different types of cancer. And one of them is Mary Kay's sister who had breast cancer. There are 2 in the book that we put intentionally that died, but this story wasn't about how they died. This story, their 2 stories were about how they lived after they got diagnosed. And one of those was Mary Kay's brother, who died of ALS. The second one was a good friend of mine who had pancreatic cancer. We told those stories on purpose because it was amazing. It was so inspirational how they lived that last year of their life.
Right. So, I mean, your situation, fortunately, was one of, receiving this diagnosis and then finding out that you did not have cancer. Was there anybody that wrote to you that had a similar situation, or everybody really, the diagnosis was correct and they had a kind of their experience of living through that?
Nothing the exact same way, but a couple friends said, hey, you need to talk to Stephen, as a matter of fact. You have to get his story. One of the people that we'll talk to you about was Vicky, who I went to high school with, And I had just seen her at our 50-year class reunion that last 3 months before. Now, when you go to those reunions, you don't ask people, "Hey, did you ever have cancer or anything else?"
Right.
Because I didn't. But you see people, what they're going through. You hear what they're going through, but you have no idea whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just curious, had either one of you written a book previously, or is this your first?
We did write a book previously. We were co-authors in a book called Footsteps of the Fearless, which is an anthology book. But this is our first venture on our own. And that was quite a lesson. But I'm glad we did it. It was great. And people are finding this book inspirational, whether they're caring for somebody or if they just, know people on the planet, because chances are you're going to know someone who's dealing with a serious illness. So, there are lessons in the book, but also it's inspirational for somebody who is going through something difficult themselves. In fact, there is a story of a woman called Lisa. We just used first name, but Lisa, who was dealing with multiple issues, types of cancers, and she was going to require stem cell replacement. We sent her the first draft of the book because one of the stories is about a guy who went through the same thing, what his journey was like, and he survived.
Wow.
Frank,
That's wonderful.
Frank, one of the things that surprised me was how hard it is to write a book. I had done a lot of writing before. When I gave it to Mary Kay to edit, it was very simple. I would send an appointment to talk to the person. I would call them. They would tell me their story. I'd write it immediately while I can remember most of it, send it to them, and I'd say, you can change it, add, subtract, we can start over, whatever you think. When they sent it to me again, then I gave it to Mary Kay, and she started editing. Before we published it, we had to send it to a professional editor. I thought Mary Kay was a great editor, and they made some serious changes. So to write this book, it was very, very different than what I thought before. And I have such an appreciation now of people that write books, what they go through.
Well, I commend you as far as working together and writing a book. I've written a book as well, but I had an editor, a professional editor, and wrote it myself. And I'm thinking, I love my wife, she's very special, but I'm thinking if I had to write the book with her, it probably wouldn't have gone real well. I'm just wondering how the two of you worked it out, working together and writing this book.
We love working together. Mark used to write a weekly leadership blog for an industry magazine when he was in the glass industry. He was president of Glass Doctor, a franchise company. But he was tasked with writing this leadership blog every week. And in the beginning, every story contained something about Brett Favre. So that's when I said, why don't you let me take a look at that and see if we can polish it up. It was so funny, Frank. Every week I would give it back to him and he would say, hey, you didn't change anything. That's great. And then he'd send it in, and inside I'm thinking, oh boy, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear. So Mark and Mary Kay, we're going to take a real quick break. I promise you 30 seconds just to recognize our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll learn some more about you, about how people could get the book. And also maybe you'll be able to share some stories with us of those that you wrote about. Okay, so we'll be right back. So do you know anyone who may be concerned about an older driver? Well, Senior Care Authorities Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older drivers. This program has been designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, you could go to seniorcareauthority.com or directly to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com or call 877-907-8841 to connect with a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. So we are back with Mark and Mary Kay Liston, who just went through a life-altering experience, and we're learning more about that and the book they wrote. So let me ask you, whoever would like to answer it, just let our listeners know how they can get the book. I mean, do they go to your website? Is it on Amazon? Why don't you share with them? It's commercial time for you, so go ahead.
Thank you, Frank. We do have a website. It is diagnosedbook.com. Or you can go to Amazon and search Diagnosed Inspirational Stories After an Alarming Medical Diagnosis, or just put in Diagnosed Liston and it will pop up. It's available there. It's available on barnesandnoble.com and fine stores everywhere.
Great. That's great. Good. So, it must have been, you had to have some tear-jerking stories that you've learned that when you talk to people, and some of those stories may be included in the book. Can you talk to us about maybe some of the most memorable stories that you heard that you could share with our listeners?
There's a story of a young man, 4 years old, who got stage 4 sarcoma. And the story is from his father's perspective. They had to move the family to another state, and they lived in a Ronald McDonald house for over a year. They still had to keep their family intact and navigate this horrible journey, make lots of very difficult decisions about the care for their son. The message that we got from that one from the dad was that as a couple, the parents need to be in alignment because you're being asked to make life-altering decisions along the way. They remained very close. They prayed a lot together. Today, that young man is a 19-year-old college sophomore, and he's thriving.
Wow. There's an 85-year-old grandma that got gum cancer, still alive. There was a 15-year-old kid, baseball player, high school baseball player, who got lymphoma. He's now 19.
The kidney transplant story is like a twofer. This is a story of Mike, who needed a kidney transplant. His wife's best friend was a perfect match, but the wife's best friend was 100 pounds overweight, and she wasn't allowed to donate a kidney. She lost that 100 pounds, donated the kidney, and they're both doing just fine.
There's a story about a paraplegic who got in a bicycle accident, and that's 8 years ago now, and it'll be 9 years ago, June 14th, and he's doing fine. He can't, he's paraplegic, lost all of his feeling beneath his chest. There's other issues in the book. What I love about it, though, we learned so many lessons, Frank, of things that we just didn't know how to do. I screwed up so many times trying to get a hold of talking to somebody when they said, I've got cancer. Oh, okay, what do I do now? But we got those lessons from the people in the book.
Right. One of the lessons we got, for instance, was I know that it feels very private when you get hit in the face with this news, but Heather taught us, don't keep it to yourself. Let other people know. Let them pray with you. Let them love on you. Let them do for you, because it blesses the other person just as much as it blesses the ill person.
One of the things that I picked up too, Mary Kay came to every one of my doctor appointments. I didn't hear anything the doctor said, nor the head nurse. All I heard was cancer. Because of that, I think it's so important that somebody go with somebody who's going through it and take notes. Mary Kay took copious notes. That's just so important.
Speaking of doctors, we heard one story from Vicki that when her GP referred her to a specialist, the specialist was cold as ice. He walked in the room with his face buried in a computer. He didn't even look at her, just rattled off, here's what we're going to do. She left that appointment so upset, went back to her GP and said, you've got to find me another doctor. And he did. The lesson there is you're going to be going on this journey with your doctor partner. And if you don't feel good about it, then change right off the top, because you've got to remain positive.
Frank, I bet every one of your listeners has said this to somebody. I'll pray for you. Well, that's wrong. Believe it or not, that's wrong. What you do is you pray with them right that second. It doesn't matter what religion they are. When you ask somebody, can I pray with you, like right now? No one says no. And it doesn't have to be an Old Testament prayer. But just pray. It could be 4 words, and they really appreciate it.
The other thing that people tend to say a lot is, hey, let me know if you need anything. That's not fair to the ill person, because it puts the burden on them to try to discern how much do you want to help and do you really mean it. Rather say, I really want to help you. I want to bring a meal over next week. What day works best for you? Or
great suggestion.
Or as Mark said, I want to go with you on your next appointment. Let me take you to your next doctor's appointment. Or I'm going to the drugstore. What can I pick up for you? I'm going to the grocery store. What can I pick up for you? So be very specific about the level of assistance that you're willing to provide.
Yeah.
One of our friends with breast cancer gave a great example. She told us how a friend of hers said to her, I know how you feel. I know just how you feel. And this person kept on saying that. Oh, you're going to be okay. I know how you feel. And finally, she said to her friend, well, what year did you have breast cancer? I didn't know you had it. She said that shut her up right away.
Yeah, no, that's a great recommendation. I mean, and any of these stories, I mean, really surprise you? I got to believe some have.
Oh, they shocked us. I would get the story, and like you indicated earlier, Frank, I'd say to Mary Kay, you better get the tissues out. This one really is a tearjerker. And the one that probably got me the most was a guy named Steven. I didn't know him. 2 of my friends on Facebook said, you need to get a hold of him. Well, he was a previous major league pitcher. At age 35, he's in great shape, swam, lifted every day, but he didn't feel well. Went to the doctor and said, Doc, what's wrong with me? Doctor said, oh, there's nothing. Went back to him, found out that he had acute lymphoblastic leukemia months from death. His hematologist, he asked his hematologist, am I going to survive? And the hematologist said, it's a tough road. You know, we're going to have to do a stem cell transplant. Now, he didn't know anything about stem cell transplants. I didn't know anything about stem cell transplants. What I didn't realize, if you're going to get a stem cell transplant, there are 10 markers in that transplant that will show that you're an ideal match. They finally found somebody in Germany. He was on the list of people who want to donate. They had to take his stem cells from Germany to New York City, get on a plane to Los Angeles, then get on a plane to City of Hope Hospital in Los Angeles. That's what they did. It was so serious, his wife couldn't leave the hospital room the whole time he was in there. He said the chemo was terrible. So it was, you know, they wore hazmat suits when they brought the chemo in. So I got this note from him. He survived. So I got this note from about 10 years ago that he went through this. I got this note after we published the book. And it said, hey, quick note that I had my first comprehensive blood work up today at City of Hope. It's been a year since I had my last one, and all was good news. I don't think I'll ever stop being nervous about my checkup. The feeling of relief when they say my numbers are good or great is indescribable. I'm full of gratitude tonight and thankful for you today. after the news sank in, I thought of you and every person in the book and thought about what they're going through. I hope they also receive good news.
Yeah.
Now, this was one of my biggest learns is that when people are telling you, yeah, I've got to do my blood test again today. I'm cancer-free. I just have to go back and get another blood test. It's been a year. They pass it off like this is nothing. Down deep, they're dying. They're afraid. They're afraid that it comes back with cancer once again. So, again, I learned something that we just have to be aware of what everybody is going through and then be there for them. Again, how Mary Kay said, however, we know it's right to do now because of this book.
Yeah. So, Mark, you had mentioned early on that one of the stories was about Mary Kay's brother. So maybe, Mary Kay, let me ask you, that had to be tough. You have these stories and here you are, dealing with your own brother. How did you handle this? It had to be tough.
He was an extraordinary individual, extraordinary grandfather, extraordinary husband, wonderful brother. What we wrote about him was how he lived his life from the moment he was diagnosed until he passed. And it took about a year and a half. As he got weaker and weaker, his spirit stayed strong. His sense of humor stayed strong. He stayed positive. He was not Pollyanna, but he was positive through the whole thing. His wife is truly a saint on earth, and she helped him stay positive. The last photograph I have of him, he died on April 1st, a couple of years ago, and the last photo I have of him is him in Easter Bunny ears, with his wife in Easter Bunny ears. He's got a full oxygen mask on, but he's smiling. And I think that his story, not only the lessons about how to be a great grandpa, but his story about how you've got to keep your attitude positive and surround yourself with positive people is really powerful.
Yeah.
Frank, they were just a year apart too. They're extremely close.
All right. That's difficult. So, listen, I could talk to you guys for hours here. It's amazing not only what you've gone through, but how I believe how you're helping so many people. So just maybe some words of wisdom, just any suggestions you have, listeners who may be going through something with a friend, a relative, themselves, with some life-altering diagnosis. Any words of wisdom for them before we sign off?
Well, we really believe in the power of prayer. Surround yourself with prayerful people. Allow people to pray for you and with you, and stay positive. Stay positive. And I believe that if you're spiritually in a place where you're not so scared about what's going to happen, it makes it so much easier. There were a couple of stories in the book where people were not faith-based believers, and their journey was more difficult than those who were, because they were able to stay positive and upbeat and looking forward in anticipation to what's next. I think that's important.
I think the other lesson that we learned right away is let people love on you. They don't know what to do. They're scared for a whole different reason. They don't want to lose you, especially when it comes to family. But let them love on you. Let them take care of you. It's okay. That was a great lesson to learn. And like I said before, these are all lessons from people who went through it. We didn't make up anything, which was great.
Right. Mark and Mary Kay Liston, thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today. Check it out. Diagnosed Inspirational Stories After an Alarming Diagnosis. So thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody. Please be safe, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.